Michigan State University's Office of K-12 Outreach, bringing research, innovation, and best practices to educators across Michigan, the United States, and the world.
Payton, and I'm going to be doing the last Eloquent Educators series today, and I'm here with Interim Vice Provost and Associate Vice President for Faculty and Academic Staff Affairs, Dr. Ann Austin, and I'm so happy to be interviewing you today.
Thank you very much, Payton. I'm glad to meet you. I'm sorry you had to give that long title. I have to look at it sometimes to remember what it is myself.
Hey, that's okay.
But I'm delighted to be here with you.
All right, so let's get started. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your educational journey and career?
I would be glad to do that. I've been here at Michigan State for quite a long time, for a little bit over 30 years. And in terms of my career, the last 30 years, I have a spouse who's also on the faculty here at Michigan State, and we raised 3 children who are young adults, but they were raised here in the area too. Looking backwards, a few highlights, I guess, about my career. When I was in high school, I had hoped to go into special education. I was especially interested in working with students who were deaf and began to prepare for that. But when I was in college, I met a wonderful woman who was the dean of students at the small college that I went to. And she was very inspiring. I could see what a wonderful influence she had on the students. And I thought that is the kind of career I'd like to have. And so I got very interested a little bit more in working in higher education, even though I'd been thinking about K-12 education. So basically I went on into higher education. I have a master's degree in counseling and higher education, and I was thinking I would work in some capacity. I wasn't quite sure as a faculty member or maybe advising in higher education. And ultimately, I did work in admissions in higher education, and then I wanted to pursue further graduate work. I studied, my area of focus was on the study of higher education. And in doing that, I found I really loved doing research. I thought I would really enjoy teaching. And so I ended up in a faculty role in higher education for many, many years, since the 1990s. Okay. Actually, no, I'm misspeaking here, since the 1980s. It's too many decades have gone by. I can hardly keep track of them. But I've had a wonderful career, primarily as a faculty member, teaching, which I love to do, doing research. But as I went along, I realized that I very much enjoyed collaboration. I enjoyed opportunities to work with other colleagues, certainly in research. I liked it when I had the chance to co-teach or teach on my own. But I began to have opportunities more in leadership roles also. So over the last, now it's probably been over 20 years or so, I've had various leadership roles, both in my scholarly field, leading grant teams, and I had the opportunity to serve as the president of my scholarly association nationally. But then here at Michigan State, I ultimately served as an associate dean in the College of Education. I worked in the provost office in faculty development in some leadership roles. And then I had the great privilege to serve as the interim dean in the College of Education here at Michigan State. I was very, very honored to do that, and I loved doing it, working with my colleagues and serving the missions of the college. It was a very special time for me. I enjoyed it very much. And as that concluded, I was invited to join the provost's office. So currently I'm serving in an interim role, but rather I've been in it almost a year. It'll go on a little bit longer. As this long title, I'm basically serving in the interim role as the Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Staff Affairs. So I really have the privilege to support faculty work and faculty in their lives and careers across the university. So it's work that I think of as service to colleagues that I really value and to the university as a whole. Wow. So those are some of the highlights, I guess, in a chronological way that got me here.
That sounds like a really amazing career path, and it sounds like you've done a lot to help your colleagues. I wanted to backtrack a little bit. Sure. You mentioned that you had a faculty member when you started school, when you wanted to be a special ed teacher for deaf. So with that being said, how was that faculty member a mentor for you? Sure. Or what women like her have inspired you?
Oh, I would love to talk about the women who inspired me. The person I was mentioning was actually once I got to college, and I was thinking about, now that I'm in college, what am I sure that I want to do? Yeah. And I had been thinking more special education, which I know would have been a very wonderful opportunity to serve others too. But the person I was mentioning, this is a wonderful person. So when I went to a small college in Maine, actually, Bates College, and the dean of students at the time was a woman probably in her 50s, a mature woman in her life, and her name was Judith Isaacson. And I got very involved in some leadership roles in the college, and I ended up working with her quite a lot and came to know her pretty well. She was a survivor of Auschwitz. She was originally from Hungary. She was a Jewish woman who had grown up in Hungary, and during the time of Hitler's power in World War II, she and her whole family, as I understand it, were taken to the concentration camps. And so she survived, her mother and her aunt survived. And, she had been maybe a teenager, I think, at the time. She ended up writing a book around the time I knew her about her experiences, very inspiring book. And I knew her at the time, I think she was starting to really talk about her experiences. But what I knew about her and came to love is how she was as a person and as a leader. And what I could see and the way she inspired me is she cared so much for the students. And you could just see everything she did was out of a sense of care and commitment to helping students really thrive and have them sort of discover who they were as people and what they wanted to do in their lives. And I was fortunate to be one of those students. But she also was wonderful because we knew, those of us who came to know her, that she'd experienced this, horrible, horrific experience as a survivor of concentration camps. Right. And yet, her whole being just shone. She was filled with love, with compassion, with a sense of service. She was a professor. And I found her so inspiring. I thought, goodness, here's a person who has experienced great challenge and tragedy. And look at the wonderful things she's doing with her life. And I began to think, gosh, if I could have, in some way, could serve and could have that kind of life, particularly in education, of helping others grow and, find their paths forward, that I would find that to be a really rewarding life. So I was very honored to know her, and we stayed in contact until she was the same age as my mom, and my mom passed away about 2 years ago into her 90s after a very long life. And Judith Isaacson also had a very long life, and we stayed in contact with each other, which was wonderful. So she was a great inspiration. I began to think, okay, maybe I won't go into K-12 education. I had actually had some leadership roles in my college in higher ed. I thought, I think maybe I'd like to go into higher education. So if you don't mind, I'm going to add maybe just a couple other people of women because I want to honor them. We're so wonderful.
Love to hear about them.
So a couple other women inspired me. One of them was my mom, too, who herself was an educator. She was a physical education teacher in elementary schools. So when I was growing up, she was a teacher. And I think my mom inspired me to go on in education, certainly, but also just as a person, as a woman, because she always conducted her life in the sense of how could she serve other people each day. What could she do that would help others? And I just found that also very inspiring. And she had a lot of confidence, both my parents did, in me, and said, live your life, do the things that you're called to do. And just that everyday sense of having parents that really believed in you and wanted you to shine. It certainly affected how I wanted to be as a parent, but it opened up doors for me to feel as a girl that I could do what I wanted to do. They always said, don't be constrained. Do what you want to do. But then when I went on in grad school, I was at graduate school at Syracuse and then at the University of Michigan. Okay. A couple other women, too. I mean, there were several distinctive women that had an impact on me. One of them is a woman named Zelda Gamson, another woman named Joan Stark. Joan Stark was the dean of the College of Education at Michigan when I was a doctoral student, and I worked with her very closely for about 4.5 years. And I learned a lot about administrative leadership working with her. And Zelda Gamson was my dissertation chairperson and a faculty member I worked closely with. She taught me a lot about how to write and how to think about research and how to think about doing research as a way to actually make an impact in the world. But she also taught me, as did Judith Isaacson, both of them, Z. Gamson and Judith Isaacson, both had this wonderful sense of their families and that you could have a life where you were very serious about your career, but you could also be very serious about your role as a mom and as a spouse. And both of those dimensions, that is my personal life and my professional life, have been really important to me. So a couple of my role models just really helped me see that you could have both parts in your life as a woman. Right. And that was really important to me. So those are some of the wonderful people that have inspired me. And I try to think over the years as I work with my own students and colleagues, especially earlier career colleagues I work with, one of the things that's been really important to me is to weave together my commitment to my family. I have my husband, I have 3 children, to my spouse, and but also to be really serious about my career and to try to model that there's ways to do both. And so I've always kept these wonderful women there in my mind as I go about my own work with the people that I work with too.
So with all that being said, would you say these women have contributed to the success in your careers?
Absolutely. I think it's really, at least for me, it's always been important to have those particular women I mentioned they were role models, they've been friends, they've been in my life all, through the subsequent years, not just when I knew them when I was younger. So they've absolutely had a lot to do with my success. But if we're thinking about success in life, I would have to also share that thankfulness to a couple other people. One of the people I would want to mention, I wouldn't want to at all forget to mention, is my spouse. I have been very, very fortunate to have a wonderful husband of now about almost 40 years, a really long time. We met in graduate school. Sure. And I am very fortunate because I know not everybody necessarily has a partner that, number one, not everybody really is able to share their life with a partner. And people have wonderful lives in all sorts of configurations of friends and meaningful relationships. In my case, it's with my spouse. But to have a spouse, as I do, who is so supportive of me, of my career, it's very, very special to be able to... sound a little moved, but I feel very fortunate because I've had a life with a partner who where we have a wonderful family that I'm very grateful for, but also just somebody who really believes in me, who listens when I'm wrestling with things, and is completely willing for me to take whatever paths that I might want to explore. So I feel very, very, a lot of my success has to do with this wonderful partner that I have.
I think that's very fortunate, especially in this day and age when it's becoming, 100 years ago, it was very uncommon to find like a woman in your role.
Absolutely.
So I think that's so rewarding and moving that you have someone in that position who's there to support you.
That's why I say people have, one doesn't have to have a partner. There's many ways that people create lives. And I think one of the good things nowadays for women is that we recognize there's many ways to have a life. And people's friends create support networks. There's lots of ways. I do think everybody needs to have a support network around them. But I've been particularly fortunate, and I'm really grateful for that.
So, of these people that have made impacted your great successes, what do you think like the most successful things you have accomplished in your career are?
In my own career, what are the most successful? I think one of the things that to me is most meaningful to me in my career, I would say, has to do with my students. I've taught throughout my career. The last 2 years or so, in because of the particular administrative roles I've had, I have not taught as much. But other than that, I have taught consistently for many years, over 40 years, if we actually start to count. That's a lot. And to me, I would say, if I think about hallmarks of what I am very proud of or what's very meaningful to me, a couple things come to mind. Number one are the wonderful students I've been able to interact with. I've loved teaching, and I love seeing the students that I work with. And for me, it's usually graduate students, master's and doctoral students, just because I teach in the field of higher education. So these are often people, young adults or adults in midlife, who are sometimes either embarking on careers or developing their careers further. But I love seeing the students discover new talents that they have, prepare for new paths that they want to explore. It's been especially meaningful to me to interact with some of my graduates. I always said I was a full-service professor or advisor, and what I meant by that is I've really liked to know the lives of my students and try to support, because they are adults, they often have families, they have work commitments, they're trying to go on in school. These are very demanding circumstances for students to be in as they're trying to get advanced graduate degrees. So I've just really loved to be able to be partners with them as they try to pursue their goals. And then now that I've been a faculty member for a long time, my students are all over the country, in fact, all over the world. And so I love to stay in contact with them and hear the wonderful things they're doing. So that's been a meaningful part. I would say another meaningful part of my career has been that I've done a lot of collaboration. Most of my work is collaborative, my research and my writing. And I love that, because I actually think a lot of the hard problems in the world benefit from multiple perspectives as people work on them. So for me, one of the most meaningful parts of my career has been the collaborations and the colleagueship that I have had with a number of people. I love working as part of teams and working on research projects or projects for the university with other people. I write a lot with other people, and I just think we get really good ideas when we're interacting and sharing ideas with other people. So that's, for me, has been a highlight. These quite a few wonderful collaborators that I've worked with. And then there's one other piece that's kind of interesting that I would highlight, I think, as I'm thinking about it. I had the opportunity about 20 years ago, somewhat to my surprise and somewhat serendipitously, I was invited with another colleague from Michigan State to get involved with a team. Some of the other colleagues were at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, to write a big grant proposal to set up a center, national center, to prepare doctoral students who are in the sciences, or in what we call the STEM areas, sciences, engineering, mathematics, to prepare them. These are doctoral students in doing work in their fields, but to prepare them to be teachers. Because a lot of times people, when they're doing doctoral work, they learn about their discipline, but not necessarily about teaching. At least 20 years ago, they hardly ever did. Now there's more attention to that. So we were able to set up this national center, and it began with 3 universities. It's now over 40 universities. Wow. It's called CERTL. It's called the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning. And its whole purpose is to help doctoral students, especially in the STEM fields, also develop abilities as teachers, because we really wanted to affect the quality of education for undergrads. And one way to do that is to make sure the people who are going to teach know how to teach effectively. And so it was really exciting working with colleagues, and this center grew from 3 universities, one of which was Michigan State, to now there's 20 years later, there's over 40 universities involved. Thousands of graduate students have been involved in this. And I'm very proud of that and very excited about my role. It was a very collaborative venture. It kind of illustrates how much I enjoy being with teams. Oh, yeah. But we've had, I think so many people have been impacted. And there was an interesting little twist to it, which is that work 20 years ago kind of led me into the world of STEM, science and engineering and mathematics. And I'm a social scientist. My original undergrad degree was in history. So this was kind of new and different to be in the STEM world. Right. And one of the things, many things happened. I mean, serendipity happens in one's life. And step by step, I've just been pulled into the national world in STEM education and improving undergraduate STEM education in higher ed across the country. And it led to working an invitation. I took a leave from here, from Michigan State, to work at the National Science Foundation for 2 years. It was 2015 and 16. I would have never dreamt in a million years I'd be working at the National Science Foundation, because my background was more in social science. But they just literally called up one day and said, I studied change in organizations. They were working on how to help universities and faculty members become even more attentive to excellent teaching, especially in the STEM fields. So I had some knowledge about how do you foster change. Mm-hmm. They invited me to come, and I was there for 2 years working with colleagues in the sciences. And one of the funny little anecdotes, but it was one of my proudest moments, actually. One day, I usually kind of deferred on lots of things to my science colleagues. If we were talking about science, they were the scientists. Sure. And I'd say, well, you folks, you probably are the ones who really know because you're the scientists. And one day, I'd been there, I don't know, maybe 6 months, and someone said, "Ann, no, we want to know exactly what you think of it." Was something to do with science about this, because you're one of us now. And I took it as a great compliment to be sort of embraced into the world of what we call the STEM world. And I subsequently, I do a lot in terms of trying to work with colleagues across the country on improving undergraduate education and teaching, especially in the STEM world. But the day someone said, "You're one of us now, you're part of the STEM world," it was just so fun to be welcomed into the STEM world like that. So that was just a fun little anecdote. I called up my husband and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm at the National Science Foundation and people have just said, you're one of us now." So that was kind of fun too. So those are some of the highlights that have been meaningful to me in my career.
That sounds pretty awesome. And to be able to work in a field that you're not necessarily familiar with.
And get familiar with it all the time.
Yeah. So with all these great successes, what were some obstacles that were in your way, especially being that of a woman?
Yeah. Well, I have 2 ways I'd like to answer that. Okay. One is that, for the most part, as a woman, I have been very, very fortunate. I have had wonderful mentors, and I've mentioned some of them, who have been women. There's certainly been many men who have supported and encouraged my career, too, and I'd want to hasten to say that. I've had wonderful colleagues. A number of them, very close colleagues, are women. I've had several really close colleagues that are men also. I mentioned this center that we started. My colleagues in that, the ones I worked very closely with, were men, too. But the point I wanted to make is you were asking me about barriers. I have been really fortunate that I have actually had many, many people supporting me and helping pave the way. I do think, however, that there's what I would call systemic issues that do create barriers, and certainly those are often gender related, and they're often related to race and ethnicity. And I would really want to be very firm that we do in our universities, in higher ed, in our society, there are very real, what I would call systemic barriers. And that plays out often in the kind of opportunities people have. I was really, really fortunate because I did have a number of opportunities and people looking out for me. But many people don't necessarily, meet the particular kind of mentors I've had, or have their early life enable them to. The pathway is not always open for people. And I think there's a lot of evidence that gender and race and ethnicity for individuals can be strong barriers. And sometimes we talk also about the intersectionality of identities and of those barriers that present themselves. So one of the things that has been important to me, and it's been meaningful when I think about aspects of my career, I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that about 20 years ago, I started to get involved in my work in the world of the STEM world, science, engineering, mathematics, technology. There are, particularly in that world, there have historically been, in some of the fields in that world, some quite significant barriers for women and for individuals of color. So one of the really meaningful projects that I became involved in really almost about 20 years ago did have to do with issues around gender equity in the sciences. And there's been a particular national program that the National Science Foundation has supported in advance, called the Advance Program, that's actually focused on the challenges, the barriers for women in STEM, in the sciences, engineering, math. And over the years, that program that the National Science Foundation, which we call NSF, has continued to support. In more recent years, the last decade, it's not only been focused on gender inequities and barriers, but on barriers that relate to race and ethnicity. So my own experience, beginning about 20 years ago, I got involved in that program. I got involved because I was initially an evaluator of some of the universities that were, with support of that program, trying to really challenge barriers and inequities, particularly around gender, and then increasingly that program focused on race also. So what ended up happening is I've gotten very involved in some of the work around gender inequities, and ended up writing, doing research, and writing a book with my colleague Sandra Larson called Gender Inequity in the Academy. It's actually, maybe I lend it to somebody. No, it's right here. It's on my bookshelf. But it's called Building Gender Equity in the Academy. We say it in the positive way, building gender equity. And it's a book that's based on research about the barriers that do happen, that the system, so it's not necessarily that individuals are trying to thwart other individuals. Systemically, there have been barriers for women and for individuals of color. In many ways, in higher ed in our society, my work is especially focused in the sciences and engineering and math, how this often occurs. And it can occur through opportunities that are not necessarily provided sometimes to women, opportunities to get in a program, or it can occur when mentoring doesn't happen. Inequities can occur in conversations or meetings when individuals are not provided opportunity to have their voice shine. There's many, many ways that inequities happen structurally and systemically. And so I have appreciated the opportunity myself to be able to do some research on that, write about that, and write about some of the strategies that universities can use to counter and to challenge and dismantle those inequities that occur. So in my own personal life, I have been very, very fortunate. I do think that over the decades that I've been in college and graduate school and working, which now is about 4 decades, a long time, our society has changed. There are more opportunities for women and for people of color also. I think in my own life, as I said, I was supported by many people, but I do think I had to realize over time that there were sometimes invisible barriers, like what do people expect that you can do? Right. Are you given a voice? There have been times in my career where I have learned that it's important to say, even to colleagues that I respect and I know respect me a lot, to say things like, I need to have an opportunity to talk about this. I can recall very specific times in my career with colleagues that I really thought highly of, but men, where I would sometimes say, you have to realize you're doing a lot of the talking if we're presenting. Right. It would be good to provide an opportunity and let me have some of that opportunity. And these were people who were so responsive when I would point it out, and they wanted to be equitable. Right. But again, our society has created norms, and sometimes we have to push against those norms more,
right.
I think.
So next, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's okay. You'll think of what you want to ask next.
With all of these obstacles that you've talked about and, what challenges you may have faced, do you have any advice for young women like myself who are about to be entering the workforce or beginning their careers, and maybe more specifically, who are going to be entering the same kind of pathway that you took?
Yeah, advice for young women. It's interesting because earlier, before we talked today, I had a meeting with another young woman colleague who was asking me advice about moving, as her career continues, moving into administration. And she's a little bit older woman than you, but as you're beginning, you said you've recently graduated and you're beginning your career. What would be my advice? One piece of advice, I think, is to really think a lot about what you know about yourself. What are the contributions that you can make? What are your special talents? And to really think about, how do you want to express those? That would be one piece of advice. These kind of intertwine a little bit. Secondly, I think it's really important, at least it was in my life, to be open for serendipity, like unexpected things that occur. I found I think it's very important to think about what your talents are, where you might feel like where would you be happy? What would you be happy doing? But then I think it's also important to, as someone I admire says, expect to be surprised. Sure. I gave the example a few minutes ago. I had no expectation that I would end up working at the National Science Foundation. Right. And in fact, when they first called, I thought, how would that work? It just didn't seem like something I would be doing. But what a wonderful opportunity. Doors open when we're receptive to possibilities. And those come in so many unexpected ways. You do a project and you think, my goodness, I really like this, and go in that direction. I think our careers take twists and turns, and in some ways, it's a matter of thinking about what are your values, what do you love, what do you care about, and then connecting it to the possibilities that are there. So I would say be open and expect to be surprised by things you can't even think about now. Third, I would say it relates a little bit to what we were saying before. There are systemic inequities in our society. I am a person who often sees the steps that we're taking forward. I like to celebrate our steps forward, but at the same time, we need to realize we still have to keep taking those. So we don't want to just rest on where we are. I do believe we're improving, we're opening up possibility in our universities and our society, and I think that's good. Having said that, I do think, especially as a woman having graduated and beginning your career, it is important to be alert to say, are there occasions when maybe my voice is not being heard, or where I maybe need to speak up. I had to learn how to speak up a little bit when I was younger, to say, I'd be interested in that. I had to learn over time. I didn't know, I wouldn't have even had the language of systemic inequities when I was younger. So, to be alert that sometimes there are things that are barriers, and it's disproportionate who experiences those barriers. So as a woman, to be alert to that, but still to be, I think, true to yourself. And so I think it's important to realize sometimes there are inequities, but not to be overcome by them. I've really thought it important to see the good efforts of people and to try to respond to those and look and work positively as we go forward. I think it's really important to know what your values are. To me, being highly ethical, really knowing what to me is right and wrong, knowing very much how I want to treat people. I mean, to me, trying to live a life of care and compassion is really, really important. And I want that to be part of how I go about my work. So I think it's really important to think about who are you? Who do you want to be in all parts of your life, and to strive for what's the word I'm looking for? Consistency and integration. And then maybe the other thing I would say, at least to me, it has been very important through my life to think about, how do I want to integrate the professional part of my life and the personal part of my life? Right. And everybody has their own sense of both professionally what would be the kind of professional life they want and contributions they want to make, and also personally what kind of life do they want to have. Right. For me, again, there's many ways to do this, but my husband and I have 3 children. It's given me great joy to raise a family. And so I wanted to create a career that would enable me to integrate my personal commitments, especially to raising our children, and being very connected with them, and also to integrate that with trying to have a career that would really make a difference, where I could really use my talents for good for other people, and finding ways throughout the years, the last several decades, of connecting those two things. I think that's a challenge, but it's a way we can put our sort of personal signature on our lives. How do we want to bring together these pieces in our lives in a unique way? So my piece of advice would be, I think it's really, really important for us all at any stage of life. I try to still think about this, to think about, what do we value? What do we value professionally? What do we value personally? And to figure out how can those things be integrated. When I say integrated, what I mean is, how can we, as women, or how can I, as a woman, honor both those parts of my life, the personal and the professional, in a way that I can, that I'm happy about, and that I feel is doing what I want for both my family and my personal life and friends, but also professionally. So I think thinking about both of those things is really important.
Right. So with all of that being said, do you have any aspirations or hopes that you'd like to see for like the advancement in education, STEM even, because you've worked with that, for women specifically?
Things that I'd like to see.
That you'd like to see in the future.
Yeah. I think we've made a lot of progress around, nowadays, in recent years, I think many people are aware that there is, the terms often we use are systemic inequities, right. That we have to look at the whole system, that change involves what we do individually, but it also involves our looking at, what are the structures, what are the norms, what are the processes that can thwart some people's experiences. And I think we as a society, I'm talking about now, are increasingly aware that individuals are affected differently. I mean, the gender matters, race matters, and ethnicity, and that everybody doesn't start out with kind of an equal playing field. So I'm very happy. I think in higher education, we're making great strides in creating more inclusive environments, recognizing how important a diverse population is in education in our society, that we need everybody's talents. So I hope that we'll keep on making advanced strides, that we'll keep learning as individuals, but collectively in higher ed and our society. How do we create environments where we really welcome the full range of talent, where we really recognize that every single one of us has something to contribute? And it's that we need to create environments where we can recognize that individual talent and contribution, and weave it together in a way that uplifts all of us. And so I think that means continuing to see where are the barriers, systemically where are the problems, but also as individuals saying, how can we help each other and elevate each other? So we have to think organizationally and systemically, and we also have to think in our day-to-day lives as we interact with each other. What are we doing to help improve each other's experiences and to help uplift all of us? But I often say, because I've written about gender equity, we don't want to leave out half the population.
Right.
We need the challenges in our society are great, and we need the talents of everybody. So creating more inclusive spaces, welcoming diverse voices, trying to create a more equitable environment for people. It's not just something that we should do because it's something we're talking about in society and higher ed. It's important because we need all that talent.
Right.
We all need it as the community of people. And so I guess my hope as we go forward is that we'll find ways in our day-to-day experiences individually to interact with more care, with more compassion, and that we'll also, each of us in our own way, figure out how do we improve the systems, the society in which we live in. Both of those are important, I think.
Wow. Well, I think that concludes all my questions I had. It was a great privilege to be able to talk to you today.
Thank you.
And I will definitely be taking some of your advice as I move on into my future career path. But I wanted to thank you for sitting down and helping conclude the Eloquent Educator series.
It was a pleasure to talk to you, Payton. It's quite fun to be asked thoughtful questions that make me think about my career, think about these wonderful people that I've had in my life who I wouldn't be here without.
It's inspiring for me to listen to that, just beginning my career.
Yeah, just really honor those wonderful people. And you will be that way for other people. That's always my hope, that I can have a little bit of a modest, positive impact on other people. Because I really do. I said I love collaboration. I believe it's together that we actually, as a university and as a society, that's how we make things better for everybody.
I
so
agree.
Thanks for talking to me, and I hope you have a
you.
wonderful career yourself.
Oh, I
great
hope
to talk
so.
to you. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.